What's up, everybody? Back here with a professional picks survivor video, this time talking about the top games in week 10. Let's take a look at the 9 candidates that we've identified here in week 10, from at the top, the heaviest favorite, down to the bottom, to the ninth heaviest favorite of the week. You've got a lot of familiar favorites with the Chiefs, Ravens, Niners, Bills, Lions on the board. And then you get some teams that you're not used to seeing, like I'd say the Giants and Bears specifically being two teams that are on a bit of a slide right now. Got plenty of options as always in Survivor, but certainly less and less as we go throughout the season. So it becomes even more imperative, I would argue, to look at the schedule and to be strategic in your picks this week, as maybe some of you are even coming to a close in your Survivor leagues that have whittled down and waned throughout the first 10 weeks. And that's why you want to look at the schedules for each of these teams, consider when you may or may not take them next, if at all. Figure out, usually for me, when's the next best home game for them. Is a lot can happen on the road, especially against divisional opponents, as you know if you've been watching these videos for a little bit of time now. So again, something just to consider when making your picks, whether it's any of these 9 teams or any other team that you may be considering in week 10. With that, let's start out as we do with the teams that I would like to at least heed a little warning and at least guide a little bit of caution before you pull the trigger and take these teams. The first one I want to talk about would obviously be the Giants here, who have looked really poor over these last few weeks. But I would say that they had a somewhat impressive showing given their standards against the Commanders in this last game at home. You finally saw Daniel Jones break out of his shell and get some touchdowns over a very elongated period of time at home in MetLife Stadium. You're facing the Panthers here, where it says it's a road game. It's a game in Germany, so it's really a road team for both these teams. I would say that, I really do think the Giants are going to win this game, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least give caution because of how they look this year and the variability that you've seen in their performance, but especially with Daniel Jones at quarterback. I think everything that I could say in bash against the Giants, I could say the same thing about the Panthers, who seem to be the true worst team in the league this year. Maybe this game will be the bragging rights for that honor. But again, this isn't necessarily that I think the Giants have a bad matchup here against the Panthers. It's just that the Giants are so unpredictable that it's hard for me to put faith in picking them. That being said, if you're feeling a little bit bold and a little bit crazy this week, I don't think the Giants are the worst team to take in terms of value perspective, but still a lot of risk just because it's inherently the New York Giants. Another team that I want to talk about is the Eagles here that are on the road against the Cowboys. You don't see a lot of logic here when you're looking at the Cowboys, who have looked terrible in these last few weeks, and they're going to be playing without quarterback Dak Prescott. I have seen some crazy things happen in the NFL throughout my time watching, and I'm sure you have too. It is not inconceivable for a team in the division to go on the road and lose to a backup quarterback. Somehow it happens, and the Cowboys, even with CeeDee Lamb, they have some weapons. Jake Ferguson at tight end. Rico Dowdle's emerging there as a pretty solid option at the running back, especially receiving the ball out of the backfield. It's hard to see the Eagles dropping this one, but again, these are road teams in divisional opponents. One of those two factors account for 75% of all survivor losses when you take a favorite that is favored by at least 3.5 points or more. So if you're going to get knocked out in Survivor, it's because you're not picking an away team or you're picking a divisional game, or the third option is you're probably just plain unlucky and there's nothing you can do there. But to avoid 75% of that variance, you can just avoid taking teams that are on the road and or against divisional opponents, and that's what's happening here with the Eagles. I don't think it's a bad time to take them, given the fact they are playing a backup quarterback. But again, it's always smart taking a team like the Eagles here until it's not, and you're out in Survivor. In my mind, it's better to be safe than sorry here, and I would probably avoid the Eagles, even though they've got a pretty favorable matchup against a backup quarterback in the Cowboys. The one thing that's hard to predict with this Cowboys team is their defense has looked pretty poor as of late, but they are getting probably the best, in my mind, the best defensive player in football, Micah Parsons, back this next week, and it's really hard to quantify and predict the impact that a guy like that can have on a defense and on a team. And really, you never know if he's going to be the spark plug that inspires these guys to play some inspired football against a divisional opponent and to stop the skid that they're on. I think the Eagles have been flying high lately, no pun intended, and the Cowboys here, again, have been playing up to a lot of the potential and expectations that a lot of people have had from them. It might be time for them to draw a line in the sand and play a tough game at home against their divisional rivals. Those are the only two games that I really am thinking will maybe have some words to say about caution. Here is the best pick, and that would be, I think, the Chargers here, as opposed to the Chiefs' fellow AFC West counterpart. I like the Chargers here, especially over the Chiefs in terms of the quote-unquote best pick for a couple of different reasons. I think that this Chargers defense is playing phenomenal football this year, much better than I expected. You're seeing the Jim Harbaugh effect come into full swing early on and midway through this season. This defense is letting up one of the lowest amounts of yardage per game and points per game, and it has been really a saving grace of this team and one of the main reasons that they're as competitive in the playoff race that they are. They're hosting a Titans team that has looked dreadful offensively, whether it be Will Levis or Mason Rudolph at quarterback. Titans on offense too traded away their best weapon, and DeAndre Hopkins to the Chiefs, signaling that obviously they are folding this season and picking up what they can next year. You don't see much from this Titans offense. You don't see a ton from their defense either. Relatively, the defense is their strength, if you can call it that. I'd give them about an average defensive grade. But really not too much going for the Titans here. And you see the Chargers start to gain momentum offensively each week as well. You love the ground and pound game that, again, a Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman offense is going to employ. J.K. Dobbins being the main beneficiary of that. But then you're seeing guys in this Chargers offense in the wide receiver room start to emerge, like Quentin Johnson and rookie Ladd McConkey there with Justin Herbert at quarterback, really starting to mesh and get some rhythm going here these last few weeks. I expect the Chargers to keep their offensive and defensive momentum going against a against a Titans team that has looked all but dreadful. Long ways to travel from Tennessee all the way to the West Coast, and Chargers in LA. I think the Chargers roll here. Now, I think that's the best pick this week, and I think the best value if you're going for a little bit more of a strategic play would be the Bears here, -7, -6.5 at home against the Patriots. The Bears these last few weeks have not looked great offensively, and any momentum that Caleb Williams in this offense started to gain after week 3 through 6 have really dissipated before our eyes. The only real strength of this team as it stands right now is how great their defense and especially their secondary has been playing. For the Patriots, they've been almost as pathetic as the Titans, which was clear in their matchup last week that went to overtime, where both teams struggled to pull away for the win until the Titans finally did. I will say the relative spark plug of this Patriots team is rookie quarterback Drake May, who has brought a little bit more passion and life to this offense, especially with his legs, as he's able to pick up a lot of ground in this game and use his athletic talents to help this team push the ball downfield when not much else is going for them. That being said, this Patriots team, outside of a little bit of spurts from Drake May, has really nothing going for them. Ramondre Stevenson's an average running back behind a poor O-line. This defense for the Patriots, even with new head coach Rod Mayo, has not been impressive. It's hard for me to see the Patriots coming in to Chicago, where the Bears, who are awful on the road, happen to have a very strong home field advantage there in Chicago. I think the Bears are a great value pick, especially when you consider that I can almost guarantee you will not be taking this team unless you're in a really bad position for the rest of the year. You look at this Bears schedule here, and they got a really, really tough second half of the season, and it's officially the hardest strength of schedule in all football in the second half of this year. And a big reason of that is because they're just gauntleted of a divisional series they have to play, going up against the Packers, Vikings, and Lions, all of which are looking to be playoff teams. And then when they're looking at their out-of-division schedule, you got the Niners on the road, and their only saving grace here is potentially the Seahawks that will come into Soldier Field. But even then, I don't think you'd be very confident in Week 17 taking the Bears there. So it's really now or never for the Bears. You're not going to see them favored by nearly this much. You're not going to see them probably favored for the rest of the year, flat out. And the fact that their defense has such a relative strength compared to a poor Patriots offense, might be the perfect time to take the Bears this week. Other picks here, you got the Chiefs at home against the Broncos. You know what? After the Broncos got decimated by the Ravens, you can see that they were a little bit of a fraudulent 5-3 team at that point, where they had a pretty much a cakewalk schedule and beating up on lesser opponents. You saw what happens to the Broncos when they played the big dog Ravens. They're going to do the same thing here against the Chiefs. The one thing is that the Chiefs do two things. They win a lot of games, but they invariably drop one or two head-scratcher games to a divisional opponent. Just about every year. Look no further to the Raiders game last year, which is a very similar build to this, where they were at home favored by 9.5 or 10 points that game and inexplicably lost. I don't think it's hard to predict when that's going to happen, whether it be against the Broncos, Chargers, or Raiders, if at all this season. But it's certainly something that is possible and something that we've seen happen season in and season out to this Chiefs team. And so that's why it's not the best pick. It's still a very good pick, given that you get rookie quarterback Bo Nix for the Broncos and an offense that wasn't able to muster up many points against the Ravens defense. And it would be very easy, based on statistics and the eyeball test this year, to argue that the Chiefs defense is better than the Ravens. So you should see the Chiefs keep rolling. The one concern there is that they're coming off a very physical overtime game on Monday Night Football. These guys are going to be beat, and that almost always has a lasting effect on the week ahead for that team. And so I would expect the Chiefs to come out a little slow, maybe not cover the spread. They should win this game, but it's setting up on a short week and an overtime as well against a divisional opponent to be probably a closer game than Chiefs fan would like this week, is my guess. This next game here with the Ravens hosting the Bengals on Thursday Night Football probably could have been classified as a proceed with caution game. This is a Ravens team that has already faced the Bengals once before this season in Cincinnati. It was a high-scoring affair where the Ravens barely outlasted the Bengals in a 41-38 overtime high-scoring thriller. This game is looking to be in a very similar fashion, where I think the over's over 50 points. The over-under is over 50 points scored. So another prediction of a high-scoring affair here. And the Bengals are getting more and more desperate as this year progresses, and they're not really in the position that they would like to be. I think you could say the same thing about the Ravens here, who, while they're winning games, they are not first in the division behind the Pittsburgh Steelers, who hold the crown in the AFC North right now. So while it's not a must-win game for the Ravens, they don't want to be a wildcard team heading in the playoffs in this stacked AFC conference. The Bengals, they want to just make the playoffs. So I think you're going to see a very tight game here, and I think you're going to see, again, a rerun of the game earlier this season, where I'm not going to predict an overtime game necessarily. I'm not even going to predict a Ravens win, but I think you're going to see a really high-scoring affair, close game, going to be decided by 3 points. This one definitely makes me nervous, and it's not a game where I would be taking the Ravens, even despite how poor the Bengals defense has looked and their really inability to stop teams from pushing the ball downfield and putting up a lot of points, as you've seen. This divisional rivalry and the second time that these two teams are playing this season makes me a little bit nervous, as again, Joe Burrow, who's been playing lights out, and the Bengals get more and more desperate as the year goes on. I mentioned that the Chiefs are probably going to be really worn down after their Monday night OT thriller. I think that you're going to see the same exact thing for the Buccaneers here. They're coming off, again, that on the wrong end of the overtime game, the loss, and a very physical one at that against the Chiefs. They're going to be banged up, with the Niners coming into town fresh, coming off a bye week. I think this is a really tough matchup for the Bucs in general, but especially given the circumstances of a very fresh team playing a very worn down team. Although, even though the 49ers are on the road here, I'm not as concerned as I would be for some of the other teams on the road on this list. I think the Niners here are also in a spot where they somehow, this far in the season, find themselves out of first place in the division to the Arizona Cardinals. They're definitely hungry and looking to get off on a good start, coming off this bye, getting guys like Debo and George Kittle one step closer to healthy. Even Jordan Mason filling in for Christian McCaffrey at running back, getting a little bit healthier. I think this team was probably the biggest beneficiary of a bye week this season. I think their fresh legs will come at a real benefit to them against the Bucs. And I expect the Niners to really roll over the Bucs here, and a good situation for them to take advantage of the short week against Tampa Bay. Another road team here with the Bills at the Colts, and you start to see us going down the list, and these games are getting less and less likely for the favorite to win. The Bills, who have looked great all season in my mind, even in their losses, with Josh Allen, the way that he's been able to play, and more importantly, hold on to the football and de-emphasize turnovers in that offense. It's really been beautiful what he's been able to do. The Colts probably going without former top 5 pick Anthony Richardson, going to ride Joe Flacco and his veteran status at quarterback. I think this really comes down to the Colts' ability to run the football with Jonathan Taylor. You know that they have the deep threat ability with guys like Alex Pierce, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, and they're going to need all of those explosive plays if they're going to want to hang with the Bills and the explosivity that their offense has demonstrated all year long. I personally don't really see too many situations where the Bills drop this game, but this game gives me sort of a trap line. I would have thought the Bills would be favored more than 4.5 against the Colts team. I would be confident taking the Bills, knowing how well Josh Allen has played and knowing how great that offensive line has been, how great James Cook has been. Bills coming off a bye. Amari Cooper, the wide receiver they traded for from the Browns, gets a little more time to get integrated in the offense. But again, everything in my mind points to the Bills. I think this line implies a closer game than I might think, and that's probably why I would stay away. Personally, you're going to get a lot better opportunities to take the Bills later this season. I don't think it's the right time. I think really it's a time to take you to the Bears or Chargers. If you haven't taken them, then you start to think about these teams more towards the bottom of the list. Got a little bit ahead of myself with where I think you should really be ending up this week in terms of survivor picks. The last game here, the Lions at the Texans. We all know the story, but the Lions, they look like the most unstoppable team in football right now. Going on the road against a really solid opponent in the Texans, although it's one opponent that's been beat up, especially at wide receiver this year. Nico Collins is eligible to return from IR, and I think that'll be a big game time decision come Sunday. Nico Collins was leading the league in reception yards before his injury, so that'll be a very close thing to keep your eye on in this game. And then other star wide receiver that they traded for this offseason, Stephon Diggs, is out for the year with an ACL tear that he sustained, I think, 2 weeks ago now. So a beat-up Texans team, but still one that's very capable. You see Tank Dell filling in the meantime, getting the lion's share of that passing attack. Joe Mixon, who they got in the offseason from the Bengals, has looked very formidable since returning from injury. And there's certainly no shortage of playmakers on that Texans defense. You know, it's hard to predict the Lions team to lose to anyone, but again, playing a playoff caliber opponent with a lot of star players on the road is probably not the right time to take the Lions here, especially after a nice emotional, big physical win against the Packers. I think you stay away from the Lions, even though it's hard for me to predict them losing that game. But that's it for me this week. Again, I really think it comes down to if you have the opportunity to take the Chargers or the Bears, I think either of those are great picks. In the Chargers, while they're not the best value, that being the Bears, I think there's a lot of value in the Chargers, as they're not traditionally one of these teams that are perennially and weekly on this list that I'm discussing. So I think you got a lot of great options just between those two teams. Best of luck, and I'll see you again in Week 11.